Hi, everybody. My name is Pat, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Just when you think you're somebody, something like that happens. Get it all in perspective. God, that's a terrible thing to do to a speaker, to have all this emotional stuff just before you get up. I mean, I'm over here sobbing into my water. This is great. This is really great. I'm always surprised at how overwhelmed I feel in women's gatherings. I haven't been to a lot of women's conferences, and I always think I'm not especially going to like it. I don't know why. I just think that, and this is really incredible. I'm going to take a whole stack of flyers back to my home group and get them all to come next year, and this is really great. I was not here. I just came in today, so I missed Polly's talk last night, but I understand that she talked about her husband losing his job and them losing their house, and you're going to get more of the same tonight. I said to her, God, we're not going to offer the newcomers much hope here. What I can tell you is this, that my life in the past year has not gone the way I would have planned it. Not anything about it. Would I have, except for the fact that I'm sober, just about that's it. Nothing else that happened in this past year would I have really picked out to have happened to me. And yet, what I can tell you about all of that is that I'm sober. I never once thought of drinking. My life is really better than it's ever been. My relationship with my husband is better than it's ever been. Alcoholics Anonymous works. When I came to AA, you told me that I could stay sober no matter what, and that no matter what happened in my life, I could not only not drink, but do it with a measure of comfort and dignity, and I've been able to do that, and that's an incredible gift. The kind of year I've had, there's no way I can be sober. I can't stay sober. I'm an alcoholic. And I know I can't stay sober because I've tried lots and lots and lots of times before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't do it. And yet here I am, sober 19 and a half years, and that's, an absolute miracle. I got drunk the first time when I was 13. I drank that particular night. I'm going to try not to talk a lot about drinking, but every time a speaker says that, that's all they do, right? I really, just wave a white flag or something if I do that, because I really love sobriety so much, I really want to talk about it. But I know there are new women here, and it's important to identify. When I was new sitting in a speaker meeting, I loved hearing the speakers talk about being drunk, and then when they'd say, and then I came to AA, I'd sort of think, oh God, now it's going to get boring. It doesn't get boring, really. I've had more fun and excitement in sobriety than I ever would have imagined. But I got drunk the first time when I was 13, and I drank that night because I was at a party and they were drinking and I wanted to fit in. I drank rum and Coke, and that magical thing happened for me. Now, it's not like I went, oh, eureka, this is it, but in retrospect, it happened, and I did it again every chance I got until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember being at that party and being ill at ease, because that's how I am sober. I'm ill at ease. I don't know how to talk to people. I don't know how to do things, chit-chat, social stuff. I don't know how to do that. And I had that rum and Coke, or 2 or 3 or however many it was, probably not much, and I got drunk, and the magic happened. I could talk to people, I could dance. I don't know if I could dance, but I felt like I could dance, And I felt like I was the life of the party. I felt that everybody was looking at me with awe and admiration, and I blacked out that night, passed out, woke up in bed the next morning with a Marine that I didn't know. It wasn't exactly, what I had intended to do there. I was a nice girl from Newport Beach in California, and believe me, the girls in my crowd weren't doing this, and I felt guilty and ashamed, and I was terrified that I'd get pregnant on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, I felt like my little 13-year-old friends were looking at me again with awe and admiration. I felt like sort of a pace setter in our little group there, and I liked that idea, the bottom line here is that I drank again at the very next possible opportunity. It never got much better. I mean, I got to where I could drink a lot more, but these things always happen. I mean, I cannot predict. Actually, I almost can predict what's going to happen when I drink. Bad things are going to happen when I drink. I was periodic for a while, mostly because I was 13 years old. I think if I'd had access, I would have been drinking it every day. I drank. Can you hear me in the back, by the way? I have never had anybody have trouble hearing me talk. This is really amazing. I'll try to talk on the mic. Huh? We can't hear you up here. See, y'all should have got here earlier so you'd have a seat up front. That's what we should have done. Oh, they're turning on me now. God. I got married when I was 18 because somebody asked. Honest to God, I have searched my heart over the years, and there simply is not a better reason than that. We were divorced 6 months later, which is no surprise to anybody. And I moved back in briefly with my parents after this divorce, and then I moved up to LA, which is about 50 miles away, and got a job in an apartment, and was really on my own for the first time. And I felt very grown up and sophisticated and like an adult. Now I can be the person, I remember thinking this thought, I can be the person I was meant to be now, like they're holding me back or something, you know? And apparently the person I was meant to be was a daily drunk, because that's what I became. My first job was for a trucking company. I was a secretary there. My father was vice president of the company. I had secretarial skills, but I'd never actually used them, you know, in a practical sense. So he very reluctantly said, "I'll give you a job for a year here." I remember him saying, "I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of hiring a family member." He was to have no idea how uncomfortable it was going to get. But he understood that I needed experience on my resume, so he gave me this job with the understanding that I would leave before the year, you know, at the end of a year. And I started working there, and I started hanging out with these truck drivers and drinking with them and sleeping with them, because that's what I do, you know. And my reputation became, and it was terrible. I wound up leaving before the year was up, to everyone's relief, you know. And that began it for me. I moved on to the next job, and I would stay there about a year and then move on to the next job. And, you know, the way I lived my life is I never really had friends. I was friends with whoever I was working with at the time. So I'm working at this company here, and you were all my very best friends, and we drink together and we sleep together, and that's it, you know. And then when I quit this job because it's just too humiliating for me to face you in the morning anymore, then it's like you all died. Now I'm at this new company, and you're all my new friends that I drink with. And, you know, when I got to AA, I did not have that dilemma of, well, what do I tell my friends? Because I did not have any friends. You know, I burned people out. They were all gone. You know, it was just kind of, here's the kind of drinker I am. I went out one time with my boss and some coworkers. We were bar hopping around downtown LA, and everybody was drunk. I was not the only person who was drunk in this party. But I was apparently drunker than most of them, because when we wound up in the strip joint, I was the only one who auditioned for a job. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. I can still see the look on their faces as I came out from behind. They thought I'd gone to the ladies' room, and the next thing I knew, I came out on stage with, you know, well, I got offered this job, and it began what I have always liked to call over the years as my show business career. I like to think of myself as having been a professional dancer, but the truth of the matter is dancing talent truly was not a requirement for the job. I actually thought, I'm a nice girl from Newport Beach. Remember I mentioned that? Nice girls from Newport Beach do not work as strippers. But it gave me kind of the idea. Another thing that has always been true about me is I'm sort of greedy about money, and I saw this as an opportunity to make a lot of extra money. And so, but what I did is I went and got a job as a go-go dancer. I don't know why in my mind's eye that seemed to cut above, you know. And so, and this was sort of at the height of go-go dancing popularity. That dates me, doesn't it? All the bars had go-go dancers in those, really all of them. All the nice clubs on Sunset Strip had go-go dancers. I did not work in the nice clubs. I worked in absolute terrible dumps. The first place I worked as a dancer, nobody spoke any English except me. It was kind of like that, you know, you kind of get the picture here. I met my second husband, the man that was become my second husband, in Nick's, where I was working, and he was a customer there, and he was not at all what anybody in my family considered to be suitable husband material, so naturally I just, you know, took right up with him, and eventually we got married, and now he drank a lot. I mean, I met him in a bar, and he drank quite a bit. I would never have married somebody who didn't drink. But after we got married, it became apparent that I drank a little bit more than he did, and my drinking became a topic of conversation from time to time, you know. Now I am married, but nothing about the way I live or behave changes, you know. And it's not that I don't want to change, I just seem incapable of it. I go out after work, I wind up going to motels with people that I don't know, and I get home or I don't get home, and you can imagine some of the conversations we had around that house. It was not good, and I started getting arrested, and not for anything. I never got arrested for drunk driving, although I certainly should have been. I mean, I always drove drunk. I just never happened to get caught doing it. I got arrested for things like, one time I got arrested on Main Street in downtown LA, which is Skid Row. I got arrested for common drunk, coming out of a bar. My next arrest was in Tijuana for obscene dancing. I don't remember exactly what I was doing that night, for which I'm kind of grateful, I think. Anyway, you kind of get the drift here. I started, you know, these discussions with my husband were getting sort of more serious and more serious, and so I started drinking at home, and I spent the last several years of my drinking pretty much drinking in a rocking chair in my living room in a purple flannel bathrobe. I went to work. Everybody knows alcoholics don't have jobs. I knew that, and so the job got real important. The jobs were sort of going downhill now. They weren't near as good as the jobs. You know, I kind of peaked my career at about age 23. I got sober when I was 30, you know, so the jobs were going downhill, but it was important to me to have that job. And, you know, the last job I had before I got sober was a job that I could miss a lot of days and did. I could do hungover and always did. I did it drunk some days. You know, it was a nothing sort of job, and that was all. I got demoted, in fact, on that job one time because, you know, I was barely hanging on to it, but I had a job. I spent the last couple of years, I guess, I don't know how much. I really was in blackouts a lot. I have no time frame references. You know, I love speakers who say it. And then in 1962, I think it was a Thursday. I don't know, you know. I was talking to somebody earlier who sort of dates her things by who she was married to at the time, and that's helpful, you know. But I pretty much every day just went to work when I could go to work, and tried not to drink at lunchtime, and came home, and the first thing I'd do is walk in the kitchen and take a drink. Once I got that first drink in me, and the bottle's there, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? And then I could take my clothes off, put on my bathrobe, which was what I drank in, and I still have that bathrobe, by the way. Every once in a while, it's in a trunk in the basement, and every once in a while when I'm cleaning things out or doing something, I think, oh, I really should just throw this old rag away, but I keep it. You know, I'll tell you, every time I open that trunk and look at that, I remember. You know, I mean, I wore it for years. It's got all the stains on it, and, you know, I think I got to hang on to that. Anyway, and I would start drinking, and I would drink essentially until I passed out. My husband was a gambler, and he was gone a lot at night at the racetrack, which was just fine with me. I preferred it when he was gone. When he was there, I felt an obligation to sort of drink different. I mean, I drank as much. It was just more work, you know. When he was there, for example, I felt like I had to leave the bottle in the kitchen and mix drinks, and, you know, and I just remembered as a lot of work, going out there in the kitchen and looking over my shoulder and then taking a quick one out of the bottle, and then putting the ice in the scotch, and then you got to put some water to make it a decent color, you know, and then back out in the living room with this drink, and now this drink has to last a reasonable period of time, whatever that might be. And when he was gone, I could just take that bottle and put it right on the table next to where I sat. Now, I don't want you to think I'm some kind of a common drunk. I used a glass, but I didn't, the ice and water and all that stuff, you know. And I would play those sad records, you know. I liked things like Ray Charles' Born to Lose. I'd play that and cry and feel so sorry for myself, and play it again and cry some more. And I turned into one of those pathetic people who called people on the phone, you know. I remember calling a boyfriend I'd had when I was 12. I'm like, I don't know, 28 or 29 years old. It's at least 3 in the morning. I've got to call maybe 12 people to get this guy's current number. You know, I'm waking up everybody. And wasn't he pleased to hear from me when I finally got through? Well, I hated myself, I hated my life, My mother was one I tormented often with these phone calls. My mother has always loved me. My mother would take these terrible calls in the middle of the night and try to say something that would calm me or comfort me, or, and she didn't know there's really nothing you can say, that's going to make a difference to a drunk, but she sure tried. I'll tell you, if I never got anything else, I'm really emotional tonight. If I never got anything else out of AA but that I don't torment my mother like that anymore, it's enough. It really is enough. As I said, my mother has always loved me in spite of how I've lived my life, but I know today that she's proud of me. She brags on me all the time. Her friends just must be sick to death of hearing about me, I'm sure, because, she thinks I'm the greatest daughter in the world, and you did that. I didn't do it. You taught me how to do that. Anyway, I had to have some minor surgery, and I was at the doctor's office, and we had set the date for this surgery for like 3 weeks from this day, and he said, how much do you drink? And for some reason I told him the truth. And when he picked himself up, he said, he was really kind of cool about it. He said, it would be a good idea if you didn't drink between now and this surgery. When you drink that much, it can have a sort of a funny effect with anesthesia, and you actually could die, if the wrong combination, or I don't know, And so I said, oh, okay. And I left the doctor's office, and of course now I'm terrified about this upcoming surgery, so of course I went right out and got drunk, and I drank right up to the day of the surgery. And I remember when I drank the night before the surgery, checked in the hospital, and they came that morning, and they give you a Demerol or something, and so you're sort of woozy, but you're awake, and they're wheeling me down to the operating room, and I remember thinking, geez, I ought to tell somebody that I've been drinking. I could die here, but I couldn't do it, I couldn't do it, and obviously I didn't die, but it made me, I think, for the first time, I remember that doctor saying to me after the surgery, because he knew that I hadn't stopped, and he said, you don't have to, you really don't have to drink like there's answers for people like you. And I said, well, what would that be? And he said, well, you could go to a hospital, or you could go to a psychiatrist, or you could go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, well, thank you, and, kind of mulled that over for, I don't know how long, some months, I think. And one night I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I don't know why I called AA that night. I was drunk at the time. I have no idea what made me walk over that phone and pick it up and call Alcoholics. Well, yeah, I do. Of course I do. God. But I didn't at the time, But I called information, and I asked for the number of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they gave it to me, and I called. And a real nice man answered the phone and asked me if I was having a problem with alcohol. I said that I was, and I started to cry. And this man stayed on the phone with me a long time, talked to me, and told me a lot about himself, way more than I wanted to know. But he was talking to me, and I was sort of grateful for that, because people were not talking to me. People were hanging up on me, and so I can feign interest, And so I remember he wanted to send some women over to my house, which I thought was a terrible idea. I couldn't think of anything worse than a couple of alcoholic women coming over to my house. I mean, I really was just appalled at the notion. Had he offered to come by, I might have, but he didn't. And so I remember I said, no, I don't think I'm that bad. I wanted him to send me some literature, and he said, well, we really think it'd be a good idea if you went to a meeting. And he said, do you think you could not drink tomorrow? Tomorrow was a Saturday. He said, do you think you could not drink tomorrow and go to a meeting tomorrow night? And I said, yes. Now, I don't know if I can not drink tomorrow or not. I drink every day, but I know the right answers here, And so I said yes, and he told me where our meeting place was the next day, and we hung up. And I came to the next morning, and I remembered making the phone call, and I remembered, parts of it, and I found the piece of paper where I'd written the address, excuse me, the address of the meeting place. It didn't seem like quite such a good idea that next morning. I remember thinking, I'm only 30 years old, and that's way too young to be an alcoholic. It's a joke today. I mean, actually, I was sort of young when I got sober in my group, but today that's like over the hill. People wonder why you waited so long, But anyway, I thought I was too young, but I couldn't stop thinking about it all that day. It was I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I heard myself say to my husband that night at the dinner table, I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We were both kind of surprised at these words hanging between us there. And he said something loving like, yeah, whatever. Laughed him into the racetrack. I dressed with some care. I remember that I changed clothes several times. You know how we do? I changed clothes. several times. I've always wanted to be dressed appropriately for whatever the occasion is. I've never been to Alcoholics Anonymous, so I have no idea what the appropriate dress might be. So I remember I tried several outfits, and stood in front of the mirror and thought about it, and then, no, that's not it. And I just remember when I left the bedroom, there was this pile of clothes on the bed that were discarded as not being quite right. The clothes that I arrived here in were, I think I went for comfort in the end. The clothes I arrived here in were rubber thongs, baggy jeans, and a knit top that all the knit had gone out of, so it just hung there. I had two of these charming tops. One was red and white striped, and the other was blue and white striped, and I actually alternated them between meetings. I would wash the red one today and wear the blue one, That's what I wore to meetings for the first, few months, I guess, and nobody ever said anything about how I was dressed. And one night I came to a meeting, and I had been somewhere else earlier in the day and didn't have time to go home and change into my meeting clothes. So I had to go to the meeting in what I happened to be dressed in at the time, which was a very pretty soft rose-colored pantsuit. And I went into the meeting, and I swear to you, every single person in my home group, I think individually, said to me, "Wow, you really look pretty tonight." And it made me feel good. It really did. And I started dressing better at meetings after that. But anyway, to go back to this first meeting, I'm in these terrible clothes, and the meeting is at 8:30 in the basement of a church, and I got there at 8:28, I guess. And now that guy on the phone said don't drink, so I hadn't drank that day. But I can guarantee you, I needed to drink real bad at 8:28 that Saturday night. I'm a daily drunk, and by 8:28, I'm often already passed out. So I was not feeling well at all that night. I went into this church basement, and I'm in these terrible clothes, and I'm needing a drink worse than I've ever needed a drink in my life, and I'm sick and shaking, and I'm sweating a lot. That was kind of a byproduct of drinking that I had. I thought I had something wrong with my glands or something. I've used all the special deodorants trying to, nothing worked. Then I was sober about 6 or 7 months, and I realized, my God, I don't sweat like that anymore. What a gift. Anyway, I digress here. There's this meeting, and I'm sweating, and it was a big meeting. It was a speaker meeting. There were, 200 or 300 people there, and they're all milling around. You know how we do, kissing and hugging and stuff, and it seemed like they'd all known each other forever. And I never felt more out of place in my life. And there were pillars like this around the room, and I remember I went towards the back of the room, and I was sort of hovering behind one of these pillars, and a man came up and asked me if I was new. And I remembered thinking, how did he know that? And I said, well, yes, I am new, and it seemed like that. There's about 50 women coming at me, and they're all writing their numbers on little pieces of paper, and I just remember lots of teeth, and I thought you were all very nice, but I really didn't want much to do with you, the truth be told. But you gave me your numbers, and I thought that was nice, and then you took me off to a corner, and you got me something called a big book, whatever that might be, and found me a seat, and the meeting began. And it was a speaker meeting, and the speaker that night was a man by the name of Norm Alpe. And this guy, you can always pick out the old-timers in the room when you say his name. He was a wonderful speaker, and he was filled with life. I was sitting way in the back of a big room, and I could feel this man's enthusiasm way back there. I really could. I identified with him. In fact, we drank in one of the same places. He was a much older man. It was many years apart, but I just identified, and I believed that he drank the way I drank, and I believed that he was sober. I could see that he was sober, and I believed that he was, happy and joyous. You could feel it. I knew I'd never feel the way he felt, though. You can't get from where I was that night to where that man was. It's impossible. What I got that night, of course, is hope. I didn't know that, but that's what happened to me. I got that big book, I took it home, and I sat up most of that first night reading it, and I remember thinking, this is great. I'm going to go to that meeting every Saturday night and be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard you say at that meeting that one should go to a lot of meetings, and I certainly thought that every Saturday night would be quite a lot of meetings, I had no idea what was yet to come. I drank again that week, which didn't surprise much of anybody except me. I don't remember picking up the first drink. I'd been sitting in a bar that following Friday night for about 5 hours drinking Diet Pepsi, trying to fit in. And then became aware that I was drunk somehow, and there were these empty scotch glasses in front of me. And I remembered thinking, I can't be drunk. I'm in AA. Not drunk, Went back to the meeting Saturday night, raised my hand again for being under a week of sobriety, and I got some more phone numbers. And one of these ladies at the second meeting suggested that I might find it helpful to actually call one of those numbers. which I, of course, had not done. The idea of calling a stranger sober is, well, I mean, I can't imagine doing such a thing. So I drank that week and called her. And she suggested that I might want to get a sponsor since I didn't seem to be doing too well on my own. I had no idea what a sponsor was, not a clue. But she seemed to think it was important, so I asked her if she'd be it. And she seemed pleased to be asked. And she said, why don't you meet me early tomorrow night before the meeting, and we'll talk about this. Now, tomorrow night was Thursday, which is not meeting night. But I thought, well, I kind of do want to get off on the right foot with this woman, so I agreed to meet her the next night, and we did that. And she said, do you have a big book? I said, yes. And she said, well, bring it with you. So I went and met her in this church hall before anybody else got there, and we talked about sponsorship and Alcoholics Anonymous and sobriety. And she said, the first thing she did is she took my big book and opened it to the front cover and told me to write that day's date in there. And I wrote that day's date in there. And she said, that's your sobriety date. Remember, I thought, I shouldn't have done this in ink. I'm very happy to report that that's my sobriety date, August 28th, 1975. Thank you. The next thing she did, excuse me, the next thing she did is she took the meeting directory, that lists all the meetings in the area, and she circled a meeting for every night of the week. I said, excuse me, I'm a married woman. This is completely out of the question. I can't possibly do that. I'd really like to go to your meetings, but I just can't. And she said, she was so nice that night, She's very gentle. I recall her as being very gentle. She said, well, perhaps you can do it on less. She said, but if you want me to be your sponsor, this is what I'd ask you to do. She said, I'll never ask you to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous that I haven't done. But if you want me to be your sponsor, I assume it's because you want what I have. And if you want what I have, I only know one way to get it, and that's to do what I do. I remember my mind was just racing, trying to, there's got to be a comeback to this somewhere. I'm 19 and a half years sober, and I haven't thought of it yet, I found myself saying, well, okay, I'll try. This is the miracle as far as I'm concerned. Okay, I'll try, but I don't think it's going to work, and I can tell you for sure my husband isn't going to like this one little bit. And she said, Pat, it really doesn't matter if your husband likes it. It really doesn't matter if you like it. She said, I guarantee you, if you come to these meetings every night and you don't drink in between and you take these 12 steps, your life is going to change for the better. I absolutely guarantee it. Now, I don't believe her. Why would I believe her? I don't even know her. I've known her 10 minutes, And that, to me, is the miracle of the fact that I'm standing here tonight. If you're new, there's people here that are new, and if there's anything at all I would wish for you, it is that you feel worse than you have ever felt in your entire life. Because that, I think it's the ingredient, the only ingredient for success in Alcoholics Anonymous. If I had been that much less desperate, I would never have done what this woman told me to do. If I'd had the tiniest little bit of a better idea, I would be off doing it and perhaps dead. I was out of ideas. I was tired. I was just tired. And so I started doing what she said. And I was right. My husband didn't like it. And I didn't like it. But I started doing it. I thought that I had the saddest life of anybody who ever came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I know y'all said your case was different, and then everybody kind of laughed, but my case really is different. Why can't you see that? And, I thought you were cruel and insensitive, and especially her. That kind woman I just mentioned turned into some kind of a tyrant now, and she's ordering me around, and I didn't like her much, Not only did I have to go to these meetings every night, but I got to get there an hour early. I had early commitments at all my meetings, like the cookie lady or the coffee person or something. So I got to get there an hour early and do whatever it is I'm supposed to be doing. And then I have to shake hands with I'm not even the greeter, but I got to shake hands with every person as they come in the room and ask them how they are as though I care. Now, I know how to follow direction, It is safe to say that I did not do this with a good attitude. I'd go around the room and I'd be sobbing. I mean, here's what, I'd get up in the morning, it's a typical day, I'd get up in the morning, go to work, come home, have dinner with my husband, have the fight, get in the car, sobbing hysterically. Now, I should say, my husband and I had been fighting for years. We just now had a new topic of conversation that we're fighting. We are now fighting about Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't like the fact that I was gone every night. I think he was glad that I wasn't drinking, but he certainly didn't like that I was gone every night, and we had a lot of serious problems over this. So I'd get in the car, I'd be sobbing hysterically from the fight. It's a miracle I wasn't killed in a car accident driving to a meeting, really and truly. So I'm sobbing the whole way and driving, and I'm thinking, it's not worth it. If this is sobriety, you can have it. It's not worth it. I'll go to your damn meeting tonight because I'm already out of the house tonight, but this is the last one I'm going to, you know. Thank God I always went that night, because evidently I always heard whatever it was I needed to hear to get me through the next day. And I say evidently because it's not like it was a great bolt of lightning from the sky, you know. Sometimes it was, but mostly it was just that I felt a little bit better. Anyway, so I'd be at the meeting, still crying, you know. I'd make my coffee, and then I'd go say hello to everybody, and you know, hi Peggy, how are you? And she'd say, fine Pat, how are you? And I'd tell her how I was, you know, with great dramatic flourishes and sobs, and you know, till her eyes would glaze over, and I'd move on to the next person, you know. That's what I did. And you were all pretty nice to me. I mean, you'd say, you know, you'd bear it as long as you could, and then you'd say stuff to me like, keep coming back, it gets better a day at a time. I don't know about you, newcomer, but that one didn't do much for me. I'm dying right this minute, and you're giving me some vague day in the future. Maybe it's going to get better. Not good enough. You know, I need help right now. One night, I think this might be the most important thing. I probably say this about 6 times when I'm talking, but here's the first time. I think this might be the most important thing I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was about 3 months sober, and I was sniveling around the room like I just described to you, and said hello to this guy, Larry, who I used to say to this old-timer. In retrospect, he only has about 8 more months than me, but he seemed like an old-timer, you know, at the time. That sort of narrows the longer you're here. But anyway, he asked me how I was, and so I began to tell him, and he cut me right off in mid-sentence. He said, I don't want to listen to that. Why don't you go find a newcomer to talk to? Perhaps you'd feel better. I remember standing there thinking, I'm a newcomer. Why don't you talk to me? I didn't say this to Larry, but I've thought it. I hated him so much. He graciously pointed out a newcomer to me. He said, that girl in the back of the room in the red dress is at her very first meeting. Why don't you just go over there and say hello to her? I didn't want to say hello to her. I wanted Larry to die. I knew it wouldn't work, but I also knew if I didn't go say hello to this girl in the red dress that Larry would certainly tell my sponsor. And it's important for me to remember this, that my only motivation walking across the room to talk to that girl was so that Larry would give a good report to my sponsor that I'd done it, you know. That I didn't care about this girl. I remember my exact thought was, I don't care if this girl lives or dies. I really care a lot about others. And yet it took me a while to see that I'm a little selfish and self-centered. I just couldn't see it. You know? Anyway, I marching across the room, sobbing still, to greet this newcomer and welcome her to AA. And the girl who had brought her to the meeting, who I knew, saw me coming across, and she said, oh, Pat, I'm so happy to see you. This is this girl's first meeting, and she had this big fight with her husband about coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been waiting for you because I just knew you were the right person to talk to her. You know, I stood there and I thought, you know, things go through your mind real fast. I thought, well, no, I'm the worst person to talk to her. Anybody in the room would be better to talk to her than me. But at the same sort of split-second thought, I thought, well, I am the one who's talking to her right now. I better try to say something positive or encouraging here. And I opened up my mouth, and I heard myself say, of all things, keep coming back. It gets better a day at a time. I've just lied to a newcomer, you know? I'll tell you what. I didn't feel it. I thought, I'm lying to this girl. I didn't talk to her more than a minute. I know I would not have talked to her more than a minute. I simply wouldn't have done it, but I turned, something magical happened to me that night. I turned, and there was a center aisle in this room. I'll never forget it. I turned, I hope I never forget it, turned and was walking back down the center aisle, and I had a spiritual experience. I realized that it was the first time in the 3 months that I'd been sober, in that hour period of time from the time I hit the door until the meeting actually starts, that I was at a meeting and I wasn't crying. And the reason was I had just talked to a newcomer. I mean, I really got it. And so, of course, from that moment to this, I've just happily worked with newcomers, and my life has been perfect. Well, not exactly. But it works. I've never forgotten that, and it works every time. I sponsor women today, and I'm very grateful for. They help me way more than I help them. I know it. You know, they save my life because I have to walk like I talk. You know, I hear myself telling them stuff, and then I got to do it. You know, and it's real helpful to me when I'm going through a bad time. You know, as I have this past year. Anyway, to go back, you know, I'm now clearly, any idiot can see the problems in my life are this husband. I mean, this is so clear. It can't have anything to do with me. I mean, I'm sober in AA working this spiritual program. It can't be me. I'm not doing anything at home. You know, I've got a bad attitude. All I'm doing is going to meetings and not drinking. You know, I'm doing the best I can, but it's not very good. And it's all him. It's all his fault. I was about 10 months sober, and I met him at a meeting. He was about 10 minutes sober. I spotted him when he came through the door. You know, my heart started to pound. I leapt across some chairs to introduce myself to him. And my sponsor noticed and, you know, got me over to the side of the room there and reminded me that I was a married woman. I remember standing there, I had a whiny voice. I remember standing there going, yeah, but I'm so unhappy. She said, nonetheless, Pat, you're married. And as long as you're married, I expect you to act married. I said, fine. I do not see this as a problem. I will get divorced. She said, no, we in Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know who we in Alcoholics Anonymous don't feel it's a good idea to make major decisions like this in our first year of sobriety. Why don't you just stay right where you are? And we, like God is speaking to her. You know, but I'm obsessed. I know you understand this if you're in this room. I am obsessed with this man. Why would God get this guy sober in my home group if he didn't mean for us to be together? Everybody understands that, right? So we began the little death dance that we do here, you know. It starts, oh my God. It starts when you sort of brush up against each other in the coffee line, you know. And all these heads nodding. And then he's walking me to my car, and then I'm parking further and further away. Eventually we, you know, it's complicated to, I mean, I'm a married woman, obviously we're not going to go to my place, and he's a newcomer, he didn't even have a place. So I want you to know, if you want something bad enough, you can make it happen. You can absolutely make anything happen you want to happen. You can convince yourself at every step of the way that it's completely God's will. The mind is a wonderful or terrible thing, depending on your point of view. So I convincing myself that this was a long lunch hour at work one day, and drove down. I worked at that time at a record company in Hollywood, and he was very conveniently also working in Hollywood at a porn bookstore. And it's kind of a newcomer job, isn't it? And I drove down to the bookstore. He didn't have a car either. I drove down to the bookstore and picked him up, and we went to a motel on Sunset Boulevard and spent some time together. And I drove him back to his place of employment and dropped him off. And I was driving back to my office that afternoon, and it occurred to me in the car that I was 10 months sober, and I was living exactly the way I had always lived. You know, the only thing I hadn't yet done was pick up a drink. And the only reason I hadn't done that sooner was nobody had asked, and that's the truth, you know. I was scared that day in the car because, you know, the truth of it is I've never wanted to be this kind of a woman. I've always wanted to be a woman that people would admire and respect, and, you know, I just never have been. And wanting doesn't make it so. And I felt like now I've messed up here in AA too. I mean, there is no chance. I'm never going to change. I would hear you say in meetings that Alcoholics Anonymous helped you in every area of your life, with every problem of your life, and I couldn't see how Alcoholics Anonymous could help me with this at all. I was also terrified to tell my sponsor what I'd done because she had been very, very clear in her direction about this guy. But the bottom line is I don't want to drink, and I knew that I had to tell her. I knew that I had to tell the truth. And so I found her right away at the meeting that night, and I told her what I'd done, and she said, you know, Pat, I think you've learned a real good lesson here today. I was as crazy that moment as I have ever been in my whole life. You know, if I've been close to drinking since I've been sober, it was that night, believe me. She said, I think you've learned an important lesson here today. I think you've learned that you're, probably not a woman who could cheat on her husband and stay sober, and that's a good thing to know, and you don't have to live that way anymore if you don't want to. Okay, I just finished telling you, I've never wanted to live that way. I still don't get it. I don't get how this is going to help me with that. I just don't get it. What I can tell you I did is exactly this. A day at a time, I stayed away from this guy. That's it. A day at a time, I didn't drive by that bookstore. A day at a time, I didn't call him on the phone. A day at a time, when he called me, I didn't take his calls. I thought I should take his calls and explain to him what was happening here. My sponsor said, no, I don't think so. I don't think we need any more meaningful conversations between the two of you. She said, I think he'll probably get the idea quick enough. I thought it seemed unnecessarily cruel and heartless, but I think in retrospect it was an excellent piece of advice, because I think if I had had one more meaningful conversation with him, you might very well have a different speaker tonight. You know, I think it was important that I do it 100%. I really believed that. And so when I saw him in meetings, I shook his hand with a straight arm. I said hello and kept moving, and that's it. Eventually, the obsession passed, of course, because obsessions always do. The good news for me is I don't live that way anymore, you know, and I never dreamed that just taking the action could make it so. I mean, it's really simple. It's hard to do, but it's simple in the concept, you know. I always thought, you know, I've always believed in God, and so I pray, you know, God, get me out of this one, I'll never do it again. You know, we've all done those prayers, and I always thought that's all you had to do was have, like, great faith and pray, and God would help you. My experience, by the way, if you're new, everything I'm saying is just my opinion. I'm right, but it's no, really, it's just my opinion based on my experience. And my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous is this: no matter what the deal is, I can't say a prayer and have anything whatsoever happen. I have to say a prayer and then get up off my knees and do the footwork of whatever it is that needs doing. In this case, it was staying away from this guy. And it goes right back to getting sober in the first place, to saying the prayer, oh God, please help me, and then picking up the phone and calling Alcoholics Anonymous and going to that first meeting. That was my footwork to do. The prayer alone, I'd been saying that prayer, God, please help me, for years before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, but the footwork was getting here. And that has been true for if it's a character defect I'm looking to be removed, whatever it is, there was always footwork involved for me to do. As I said, the good news for me is that I simply don't live that way anymore, and I'm grateful. I never dreamed that my life could change, you know, because of the tools that you gave me here. My first sponsor drank when I was about a year and a half sober, and she's sober today a long time, 15 years I think, but she drank at the time, and I got another sponsor, and this woman was sober a long time, and I wanted what she had, which was happy, joyous sobriety. I wasn't even close. I was still whining and sniveling around the place, and feeling sorry for myself, and you know, it's all his husband's fault. And this new sponsor said, you know, Pat, I've watched you cry and carry on, and I want you a day at a time to just act as though you're a kind and loving wife. What an order. I can't go through with it, you know. I mean, I don't even like him, you know. He's not too fond of me and hasn't been in years, and you know, I remember I said, I don't think this marriage can be saved, and she said, possibly not. Possibly you're going to have to walk away from it at some point, but you're there right now today, and I think it'd be a good idea if you stayed there and acted as, just pretend like you're a kind and loving wife, and maybe in so doing you can make some amends to him for some of that stuff that you did. And then if you do have to walk away from him down the road at some point, maybe you can do it with no guilt. No guilt was the part that got my attention, because I had lots and lots of guilt. You know, I cheated on this man all the time, regularly. He knew about some of it, but he didn't know about most of it, but I knew about it. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is real clear on these sort of difficult amends that you know, we can't, when it says you can't do so to do so would injure them or others, clearly means you can't go home and confess infidelities that they didn't know about just to clear your conscience. I mean, that's real clear to me. So there didn't seem to be any good way to do that. And when she suggested that by just acting as though I were a kind and loving wife a day at a time, maybe I could do that, I became willing to try it. And so I began. This woman taught me so much. The first thing she had me do was every day when I came home from work, I was to ask him how his day had been and then sit down and listen to him while he told me. I was not interested in his day. She said, I don't really care if you're interested or not. Your direction is to listen for a minimum of 10 minutes. So the first night I went home and I said, so, how was your day? He looked a little surprised that I was asking, and I kind of checked my watch, you know, and you know, he told me a few things that had happened to him at work that day, and they were sort of meaningless little stories to me because I didn't know the people he was talking about, and you know, there was no frame of reference for anything that he was telling me, but I listened for the 10 minutes and I left the room, and I was driving in the meeting that night and I wasn't crying, and I didn't understand until years later why I would not be crying that night, because we still had the same fight before I left the house that night that we've been having every night for a year and a half, the same fight about Alcoholics Anonymous, but I'm not crying tonight. Why is that? And I know today the reason is because I'd finally taken my focus off of the problem and I was busy in the solution. And the minute I do that, I start feeling better, even though the problem is still there, I remember one night in a meeting, a woman that I greatly admire turned to me, and we were standing in line to thank a speaker or something, and she turned to me, and it seemed to me, looked down her nose at me. She says she didn't do this, but I remember it, believe me, and said in this tone of voice, "Oh, and how is the Queen of Tragedy tonight?" This is not the way I want people I admire to think of me. I hated her so much at that moment, but I'll tell you what, I went home that night, I don't think I slept that whole night. It was like she put a knife in my heart and twisted it. But I started changing after that. I started acting better than I felt, a lot more, It was really a turning point for me. My sponsor gave me directions early on that, I was talking about my husband. See, I do that I'm 50 now. And they say the mind is the first to go. Jumping around here. My husband I was talking about. So this woman has given me these directions of how to act like a kind and loving wife, and I was to treat him with courtesy and the simple kindness that the one thing that she told me that helped a lot was she said treat him as well as you would treat the newest newcomer in the room at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and that was real helpful to me because I know exactly how I would treat that person, and so that was kind of helpful to me. Some days I did good, some days I didn't do so good, but I followed these directions, and there were, of course, other directions, but you get the general gist of what we're doing here. And one night I was on my knees saying my prayers, which were very, very simple. In the morning I would get on my knees and say, "Dear God, please help me stay sober today. Amen." And at night I would get on my knees and say, "Dear God, thank you for keeping me sober today. Amen." That was it. I did that because my sponsor told me to. I believe in God. I have always believed in God. But the whole time I'd been saying that prayer, I felt not one bit of connection. They were just empty words in the room. But I did it because she said to do it, and I wanted to be able to say, yes, I'm doing it if she asked, And so I was on my knees this night, and I was saying that prayer, "Dear God, thank you for keeping me sober today. Amen." And I started to get up, and I realized that I was comfortable in that house with that husband. And it hadn't happened that day. It had already happened sometime before, and I hadn't even noticed. I remember thinking, oh, it must have happened yesterday. But yesterday was a good day too, and the last week seemed like that was a good week too. And I don't know, and I still, to this very moment, have no idea when that happened. I just know that it happened. I was absolutely astounded. I mean, how can this be? This is the biggest problem in my life, and I didn't notice when it went away. How can that be? That's impossible. What I can tell you is Alcoholics Anonymous works. It absolutely works. By acting like a kind and loving wife, I had in fact come to feel like a kind and loving wife. I had become a kind and loving wife. I remember I got back down on my knees that night, and I thanked God for this new feeling that I had. And I remember I said, "God, I believe that if you mean for me to stay married to this man, I could do that and stay sober and have a happy, joyous life. Thank you." Not too long after that, we found out that he had lung cancer. And my very first thought, being the selfish, self-centered person I am, is, boy, I wish this would have happened when I hated him. I don't like that about me, but that's who I am. That's how I think. Me, how is this going to affect me? What am I going to do? How am I going to feel? I don't much like to tell you that, but that's it. The gift here is that you've taught me how to act differently. I shared right away with my sponsor and somebody else about that I was feeling that because I felt guilty for feeling it. And my sponsor said, "Just keep doing what you've been doing, Pat. You're doing fine." And so that's what I did. He was sick for a year and a half. And it was hard. It was real hard. But it was also the best year and a half of our marriage. We were married 11 years when he died, and that last year and a half was far and away the best time of our marriage because of what you taught me. You gave it to me. When he died, I went down to this little chapel and made some funeral arrangements, and a couple hundred people from Alcoholics Anonymous showed up, and those people didn't know him. They'd never met him, but they came because they knew that I would need them that day, which of course I did. I realized sitting in that chapel that day that what my sponsor had promised me had happened. There was no guilt. I felt clean and whole and absolutely current in my relationship with him. I felt sad, obviously, about his death, but I knew that I had made my amends to him. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had made my amends to this man. This sounds real fast. I started dating Vince. It wasn't quite that fast. It was kind of fast, but not quite that fast. Vince was somebody that I had known from the time I got sober. He's in my home group, and he's sober a few years more than I am, and I knew him as a friend, which is a whole new experience for me. I never dated a friend before, ever. You know, every relationship I've ever had in my life up until this one is I meet a guy, we go to bed, and then we embark on a relationship or not. Little identification down there. Vince had been my friend, and you know, we started dating and fell in love and eventually got married. And I know, beyond a shadow of it, we have a good life, you know, and I know there's no question that it wouldn't be possible if I hadn't learned how to do it there with my late husband. You know, every direction that I've ever had in Alcoholics Anonymous, everything I've ever been told to do has this sort of, I think of it as this sort of ripple, ongoing ripple effect, like a wave. You know, you do it here and it has an effect next year and the year after and the year after. And, you know, the tools there with my late husband, not only did they give me that incredible gift of that last year and a half with him, but they've given me the ability to be the kind of wife that I am today with Vince. Which is not to say that I'm like this perfect wife, but believe me, I'm 1,000% better than I ever was, you know, and that's because I learned it there, you know. As I said, he's a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're both very active in our home group and you know, get the opportunity to speak a fair amount, which I'm very grateful for. I like to speak in Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to be, it's a good reminder for me of where I came from. You know, when things are good, it's interesting because I was thinking about this. When things are good, it's a good reminder for me of where I came from, so I don't get too cocky about it all, you know. And when things are bad, it's a good reminder for me of how much better they are, no matter. Oh, I'm so emotional here tonight. I can feel it coming. I hate this. I might as well just jump right to it. I keep dancing around it here. This last year has not been a good year. Let's see. My husband and I have been in business for about 12 years together, and about a year ago business started getting bad, and you know, it was sort of, we were sort of in denial, you know. It's like, well, things are bad, we're going to have to do something about this, but then we wouldn't do anything about it, you know, and started living a little bit off of credit, thinking, well, it'll get better, and it didn't get better. And my mother went in the hospital in July for what should have been a real simple knee replacement surgery, and turned out real bad. And originally they said she would never walk again. She went dancing last week, so they were wrong. But at the time, yeah, you bet. But at the time, the doctor said, well, it doesn't, and his bedside manner left a lot to be desired too, but he said, it looks like she's never going to walk again, and we'll keep her in the hospital a month or two and do some therapy, but it doesn't look very good. And 3 days after this surgery and this news, my husband had a heart attack, and it was hard. It was a hard month, I'll tell you, and they were in hospitals like 25 miles apart. So I went to the hospital, obviously, to be with my husband, and I called one friend in AA. I called my sponsor, and I called one friend in AA, and for the next 3 weeks, my mother had a steady stream of visitors. I mean, there must have been, the women, the nurses in the hospital said, my God, who are all these people? And, you know, my friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, I mean, they saw the need, and they just went and did it, you know. They entertained her and brought her food and candy and newspapers and, you know, cheered her on when she had little bits of improvement, and what a gift. You know, I remember years and years ago, before I got sober, my late husband got sick one time. He had the flu or some real bad, high fever. It was a pouring, raining, cold night. I knew he was like delirious, you know. I knew he needed to be in a hospital. We had no money. I knew he needed to be in a hospital. I had no money to call an ambulance, and I could not think of a single person I could call to help me get him down the stairs, you know, to take him to the hospital. So I thought, well, my mother, when I was, you know, a kid and had a fever, would always put cold cloths on my forehead, and, you know, so I thought, I can do that. So he's laying on the couch, and he was really out of his mind, and so I started with the cold cloths, and I was so upset, I went and mixed a drink, and then the next thing I knew, I woke up in the morning, I was sitting in the chair across the room from the couch, and the drink was spilled in my lap. I'd passed out, and my first thought was, my God, he's probably dead. You know, I drank, and I passed out, and he was fine. His fever had broken that night, but the difference between that And today is like, you can't get from there to here. You can't get from not a single person in the world you can call in a dire emergency to you just make one little phone call and say, boy, I'm having a bad day, and people are out of the woodwork, trying to help you. It's amazing. It's just amazing. So my husband had this heart attack, and we didn't work for a couple of months because of that. And it occurred to me that we needed to get some money coming in here, and so I said, well, maybe I need to get a job. And I worked as a legal secretary for years before I went to work for him, and so I type 130 words a minute. I thought, piece of cake, no problem, And so I called up this agency and I said, I'm looking for a job. And she said, well, and you have computer skills. Well, no, I've always sort of resisted automation here. She laughed at me. She said, we don't have any jobs for people without computer skills. I'm like, oh my God, I'm 50 years old and I have no way to make a living. I was terrified. And so I got on my knees and I prayed about it, and it occurred to me when I got up that maybe the thing to do would be to go take a computer class. I may look dumb, but So I went and signed up for this class. It was an 8-week class, met once a week, an 8-week class, and I went to the first class, and I thought, I remember leaving the class at the end thinking, I'll never get this. I can't do this. I can't do. I don't understand a thing they're talking about. It's like they're talking Greek. I do not know I can't do it. But you taught me here that I just suit up and show up and do what I'm supposed to do. So I went back. My husband said to me that night, well, how's the class? I said, well, it was fine. I don't know anything yet, but I think it'll be fine. You told me how to act as if, and it seemed like a good time to do that, And I went back the next week, and something clicked that week, and I thought, oh, I see, and I started to sort of get it. I was in the 6th week of that class, and a woman came up to me in a meeting and said, are you looking for a job? And I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. And the long and short of that story is I'm working for that company. It's like 3 minutes from my house. It's not a great job. But I'd rather not be working, but it's a good job, and I'm real grateful for it. My husband is fine. He's recovered from his heart attack. Our business is absolutely terrible. Yesterday, before I came here, we signed papers with a realtor to sell our house, which makes me very sad. I told you, you're getting exactly what Polly gave you here. I wouldn't buy a house if you're new, okay? Just, I really love our house. It's a beautiful house. We've had a lot of wonderful AA events there. We've had a number of weddings at that house. I have no idea what our neighbors think. Every other month there's a bride and groom out in our backyard. We've had wonderful Christmas caroling parties with 200 and 300 people and caroling in the neighborhood. Just lots and lots and lots of fun. We just last month, which will probably be the swan song of parties at that house, and I'm grateful that it was this event. We had a 30-year birthday party for a good friend who's sober 30 years, and I'm glad we had that. It was a wonderful party, and I'm glad that we had that. And it occurred to me, I felt so bad about this house and feeling so sorry for myself, and it occurred to me, it's not my house. It's like a gift. It's like been a gift to our whole AA group. We've had all these wonderful Pacific group events in that house, and hasn't that been nice? And now somebody else can kind of take over the reins of doing that, and that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. What I know is this: I'm sober. My husband is sober. We're healthy. We have each other, and we have lots and lots and lots of friends. I don't know what's down the road for us, but I know that whatever it is will be just fine. If I used to hear speakers say this when I was new, if you got everything you wished for when you were new, you would shortchange yourself. I'd sit in meetings and think, not me. I got big dreams, I got great big dreams. I wouldn't shortchange myself. Well, I would have. What I saw then as the answer to my happiness wasn't even close to what God gave me. Wasn't even in the ballpark, So I assume that is still true today. What I see is the answer here is I don't gamble. But if Mom won the lottery, I know she would save our house. So that's what my mind says. That's the answer. That's the miracle. But I bet you God has a much better answer in store for us. I bet He has some much better place for us to live, or much happier way for us to live. I think maybe the answer is, in many respects, not to have the kind of pressure, financial pressure that we've been under, for my husband's peace of mind and for his, his heart, for his health. And there's a lot to be said for that, If you're new, I want you to understand something. This is not depressing. It's a little sad, and I know that we'll probably cry the day that we move out of the house, but I'll tell you what, The day we bought that house, we moved out of the project apartments in Venice, and we cried the day we moved out of those apartments because we were real happy there. You know, we spent the first years of our married life in those projects, and we loved it there. We had much smaller parties there, but we had get-togethers and happy, wonderful, good times there too. And so I expect that wherever we wind up, it's going to be the same. What I know is this: that what was promised to me when I was new has happened for me. No matter what has happened to me, I've stayed sober, and I've been comfortable, and had a measure of dignity through the things that I've gone through. I've not once this year thought that a drink sounded like a good idea, and that's impossible. I'm an alcoholic. I drink every day, and yet for 19 and a half years I haven't had a drink, haven't thought about having a drink. Good times and bad times, and that's a miracle. You know, you gave that to me. You gave me the tools on how to do that. You gave me stupid directions that didn't seem to have any relation at all to the problem at hand, and it changed. Somebody said it in a workshop earlier. You know, you'd call your sponsor and you say, here's the problem, and they give you some answer over here that is clearly unrelated. I remember my sponsor one time. I'm really not going to talk all night, honest. My sponsor, I called her one time. Now, my husband at the time, I'm married to my late husband, he's fighting with me all the time about going to meetings. He doesn't understand why I have to get there an hour early, and I don't do a good job of explaining that to him because I don't understand it either. Now she gets this idea that once a week she wants me to pick up these two old ladies, Claire and Zelda, and bring them to the Thursday night meeting. Now, Claire and Zelda, you can bet, don't live conveniently to where I live. I can't cut into that hour time to pick them up. I have to leave so much earlier, you know, so I can go out of my way to get them to get them. I don't want to do this. I don't like Claire and Zelda. I don't want them in my car. I don't want anything to do with them. Claire and Zelda were, at the time, they seemed like they were 110 years old to me, honestly. They just seemed so old. And they both smoked, which is fine. I smoked then too, but they both had this really isn't funny, but they both had emphysema. And so they'd get in the car and they'd fire up these cigarettes and then start that awful coughing, you know. And the truth of the matter is I was afraid one of them was going to die in my car, and that's the truth, you know. I remember I spent a lot of time thinking of, when you're new, you're just obsessed on things. I'd be driving in the meeting and I'd think, okay, all right, Pat, if they die, if Zelda was the worst. If she dies, I just pull right up out here when I get to the meeting. I come in, I get some guys, and I go, Zelda's dead in the car, go get her. You know, I don't have to worry about it. But driving home from the meeting is a different matter. There isn't anybody on the other end, you know. Every Thursday afternoon would roll around, I'd start thinking about, I have to go pick up Claire and Zelda. I don't want to do it. I'd call my sponsor from work, and I'd say something like, well, we're kind of busy here at work, so it looks like I might have to work late. And she'd say, well, you better get a quick bite at your desk then, because you can't be late picking Claire and Zelda up. And I'd drive out there and pick them up, and I hated them. I hated doing it. And one night I went to pick them up. I'd been doing it for months. Went to pick them up, and Zelda was sick and couldn't go to the meeting, so I got Claire, and we went to the meeting, took her home. And the next day I was at work, and I found myself thinking about Zelda and wondering if she was okay. And God, I couldn't even believe it. I mean, I hate this woman. What do I care, you know? But I called her to see if she was all right, and the truth of the matter is I'd come to kind of care about Claire and Zelda, and I believe that was the beginning of me learning how to be a friend, you know, right there, picking those women up, I believe was how I started learning how to be a friend to women here, and that has certainly been the biggest gift maybe of all in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new, I'd like to welcome you here. I hope that you stay. I hope this hasn't been depressing. I mean, you know, bad things are going on in my life. I understand. I feel so good right this minute, and about the way I live my life, about the way I feel about my husband, about the way I feel about myself, about the relationship that I have with the other members of my family. My life is good. It's really, really good. If you're new, I'd like to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd recommend that you do 3 things that I think are pretty important. One is get a sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor, I would heartily recommend that you get one before you leave this room. If you don't know how to get one, I'll tell you. You go ask somebody. What you want is a winner. A winner is somebody who's active in Alcoholics, obviously somebody who's sober, and who's active in Alcoholics Anonymous. Look around and see who's on the committee here, and who are the people that are cleaning up after, or whatever. Those are the winners. Go ask one of those people to be your sponsor, and it doesn't have to be there. There seems this sort of trend. We were talking about this earlier. There's this sort of trend, like for the perfect sponsor or something. I find people, I actually feel like I'm being interviewed to see if I'm up to their standards, you know? That's very interesting to me, because if you knew, you wouldn't know a good sponsor if you were talking to one. I mean, how would you know? And so, I recommend you just go ask somebody. The second thing I recommend you do is get a home group, a place where you belong, where you have commitments, where you get to know these people. Don't just bounce around to a meeting here and a meeting there and never really falling with one group of people. You need to get established with a group of people who, you know, if you miss a meeting, someone might call you and save your life. You know, you really need to let people get to know you no matter how much you hate the idea. The third thing I recommend you do is get a friend, somebody sober about your own length of time that you can hang out with and talk to and tell your stuff to. My first friend was a girl named Betty, who was sober 3 days less than me, and I told Betty everything before I told it to my sponsor. It's nice to hear how it's going to sound out loud before you actually, you know? So I'd call Betty and I'd say, all right, Betty, here's what I'm thinking of doing, or here's what I've done. Sometimes she'd say, oh yeah, I've done that, sounds cool. Mostly she said, oh my God, you better call your sponsor right now. It's a pretty good kind of friend to have. Betty was sober 3 days less than me. I talked to her about 2 weeks ago, and she was drunk. And boy, that makes me feel bad. You know, it really does. I really love her a lot. And I said to somebody said, I don't understand why she's drunk. And I don't mean to be telling her story or to be bad-mouthing her in a way, but I know why she's drunk, because she cut corners. You know, I watched her do it over the years. And, you know, I get tired and I think, God, I can't do this or I can't do that, or why don't they ask somebody else? But I'm afraid to cut corners, because I don't know what the one thing is that's the key here, you know? Maybe it's all of it. Maybe I could drop that one little thing, but maybe that's the key, you know? I'm afraid to cut corners, and having Betty do that is a real good lesson right in front of my face, I'll tell you. I don't want to drink again. I like the way I live. I like the way I feel. I want to stay here. And so, tired or not, 50 years old or not, whatever, I think I got to just keep doing the thing, because it works, and it works real good. Thank you.